The last question comes from Chris. Here's what Chris asks. Right now, I'm diving into the whole breathing, biomechanics, and movement information you provide. I live in Germany, where nobody really knows shit about the stuff you talk about. A lot of people are very critical of the concepts that I play around with. Do you have any advice on how to get clients and other coaches to come to the light side? Also, can you share some studies that can help me back up the stuff I'm talking about, especially some of the pelvic movements during breathing, squatting, hinging, movement variability, etc.? People always want to see the evidence. So it would be nice to just stuff some studies down their throat so that I can keep learning in peace. Also, I kind of want to know that what you're talking about is actually true. Keep doing what you're doing. Lots of love from Germany. Chris. Chris, this is a really good question, man. And I feel for you. It can be really tough when you are doing something that deviates from the normal standard of care. And you'll be branded as a heretic and all that. And I think that's just because people in general are resistant to change of any kind. It's hard, especially when you are hit with something that goes against perhaps something that you hold near and dear. I mean, you have to think about it from their perspective. They might have done things the way that they've done for an extended period of time, and they have their own framework and thought process. And if they are challenged by something, that can elicit cognitive dissonance. And when you have cognitive dissonance and you feel threatened by, oh, this is something that is near and dear to my heart, of course you're going to push back. So I totally get why they would react this way. 1. 2, if you got someone who wants to see evidence for what they're doing or what you're doing, they probably also care about their clients and what they want to do, and they want to make sure that they're establishing best practice. So I totally think that this is justified. If you need research, I will link my references page on the show notes that I use for Human Matrix, my seminar. All of my references are there, so don't hesitate to share that with them. And it's just zachcouples.com/references. Check that out. You'll have a lot of stuff to go into. And, is what I'm doing true? I don't know if we know that. I don't know if we can ever know the truth in science, because that implies that this is a definitive thing. And the nice thing about science is it can always change, and it should change. I'm hoping, when I look at the stuff that I did last year, I shudder because, wow, that was stupid. I like how I'm doing it now, and I hope to do that in the future. If I look back into what I did 5 years ago, yeesh, should send apology letters to all my clients every year. So there is nothing that's true about this, and even though what I do, it seems to be effective for my clients, and it resonates well with me, and there's definitely some confirmation bias in things that I hold near and dear to my heart, because I'm just as guilty as these folks. But if I found a better way, I'd like to think that I would change, and I would be open to that. But how do you educate them? You could definitely throw the research studies at them. Are they going to read it? No. I think the best ways to do this is to find some common language and find some agreement points with the people who you're talking to. Because if you can find what principles are fundamental between you two, then I think it's much easier to have these conversations. So some principles that the people who you're working with may have in common. You could ask them, what do you think about intra-abdominal pressure? And ask them. Don't try to pontificate about them, because if you are coming in full bore about whatever it is that you want to do, I generally find it being more successful if you seek understanding of them first and where they're coming from. That's going to do a couple things for you. One is going to better allow you to have a conversation with that person, so you can kind of meet them where they're at. You're almost learning their language, and you're learning their story. It's going to make them less defensive, because they see that, oh, wow, Chris, he's a good dude. He wants to know what I'm thinking. And three, the better you understand their argument, the easier it's going to be to come at them wherever their pitfalls are. And maybe, how about this, Chris? This could be a wild concept. Maybe you take time to understand what they're saying and they actually change your mind. And then you are doing something different. So you could only get better by having these conversations with them. So the first thing you want to do, first and foremost, is seek understanding of what these people are trying to say and where they're coming from. Do that first. Find the common points. Maybe it's intra-abdominal pressure. Then you could talk about your perspective. Well, with intra-abdominal pressure, what goes into that? Well, did you know that if I have a reduction of intrathoracic pressure, that it can actually increase intra-abdominal pressure in a negative manner? Well, how would I get a negative alteration of intrathoracic pressure? Because actually, if you look at some of the IAP research, those should be kind of the same, and they should be able to increase and decrease simultaneously. Well, if you have any restrictions in the rib cage dynamics, that's going to change how things pressurize. That might actually increase intra-abdominal pressure in a negative degree in the abs. So you could just start simply with something like that. From a squat, because this is something that I've succeeded and failed with when we're talking about squat mechanics, because I coach squatting a bit differently than a lot of people do. But I would ask these people, how do you differentiate a squat versus a deadlift? What is knee dominance? What is hip dominance? And I would be curious to see what they would say. Because maybe, you get those talking points and you can say, well, okay, what has to happen specifically at the pelvis to make that the case? And so it's really just about having good conversations and not seeking to change their mind, but seeking to understand where they're coming from and seeing where you can bridge the gap with talking to them about that. Because I think that's one issue that we have, especially on social media, is we can't have those face-to-face conversations, because really it's just about saying whatever you believe, and then you can't have the nuances of conversation. You can't seek understanding. You can't have common ground. You can't have those nonverbal tics. You can't appreciate all that stuff. And so I think, Chris, in your case, you are in a unique and useful situation because you can have those conversations. And also, too, Chris, I would ask them, this is actually a good question that I got from Scott Adams, there's a great book called Loserthink that I would strongly encourage you to read, and Win Bigly, because I think these two books would be essential in getting your message. But he has this $1 million question that he asks someone who maybe disagrees with him. He'll say, I want you to tell me in this situation, what is something that I believe about this exercise or activity that you think or that you don't believe? And they might say something, and perhaps they're actually misinterpreting what you're trying to do. And then you can say, well, no, actually, I do believe that we're trying to do this on the squat, or I'm trying to coach this particular exercise in this manner. So you may also have to seek understanding of what they're trying to ask you or why they're challenging you. I think that can be very useful as well to better have a conversation, so then both you and the other person can grow and get better. To summarize your amazing, sexy question, Chris, when you're trying to educate others on why this stuff is useful, seek to understand their point first. Really understand where they're coming from. Understand why they have contention points. Ask a bunch of questions before you go vomiting the research articles that I'm going to share with you. Do that first. Really understand their point, because that's either going to change what you're doing, which is good, or that will better help understand where the pitfalls are of their argument so you can better carry on your point. That's piece one. Piece two, find common ground. What areas do you agree with that person? Because if you have those underlying fundamental principles that are the same, they're more likely to be receptive to the last part, which is now you can introduce some of the challenging points. That could be throwing some of the research at these folks. That could be showing them the lens that you're looking at things from a unique perspective. And while I don't know if what I'm doing is true, it has seemed to work pretty well with the people who I work with, but if you need some specific research, I will share that in the show notes.